The next phase will be trimming and ditching the dies. So to do that, we can use any of the following burrs depending on the size of the ditch that we want to do. So we have round burrs like this of different sizes. Depending on how deep we want the ditch, and some of the larger ones we can use to trim away the excess gingiva, or we can use different size pear-shaped burrs for the same purpose. You can use the big ones to trim away most of the gingiva, and the smaller ones to refine our ditch. There's another size right here, so any of these can be used. If we want to sharpen the margins a little bit more, we can use a smaller round burr, or we can even use a straight burr with a rounded end. Now the next thing we do, since I didn't use a rubber stopper on the end of these dies, I'm going to use a special burr like this, and this has a hole in the middle and the cutting edges are on the outside. This will make a hole around each pin. Okay, let's turn on the suction. And we'll make the holes. So we just aim the burr so that the pin is right in the center, and it will empty out the stone from around the dowel pin. This will allow us access to each dowel pin so that we can push out each die. Sometimes if we leave the model too long after we board it without removing the dies may corrode and may get stuck a little bit. So now that we loosened up the dies, we're going to make sure they all come out in one at a time. That's one. That's two. That's three. And that's four. That's five. and that's 6. So they all come out. Now we're going to start trimming. Okay, so now we're going to remove the excess gingiva. We're going to use the round pear-shaped burr. Now we're going to go close to the margin, but still leave a little bit of the tissue around it. So at this point we're going to make a slight ditch. We don't want to go in too deep though. If we go in too deep, what's going to happen is when we exert pressure on the margin, there's not going to be anything underneath the margin to support it properly. So if our ditch is too deep, we're gonna end up cracking the margin once we start waxing. So let's be careful about that. So the next thing I'm gonna do is use a finer burr, such as this round burr. It's cross-cut, and see how well this works. And with this we can go a little bit closer to the margin. And again, let's be careful not to over ditch. Now we can go with even a smaller burr. This is a pear-shaped burr. This is really fine, so there's less chance of breaking the margin. So we can go really close with this one. can. It's going to be a chance that you might end up ditching this too far or too deep under the margin when you're using a small burr like this. So just be very careful and just go around with gentle touches. You can always ditch it a little bit more with the round burr if we need to. At this point we don't need to. So once we're really close to the margin, we can clean up the ditch a little bit so there's not a lot of scratches. Then we can use an instrument like this that has a very blunt and rounded area here. So at this point we can take the die and use the edge of the instrument and just go really right to the margin, very slowly. Don't exert too much force because you don't want to chip the edge of the margin. Now this margin is called a deep chamfer, so it's really easy to break. And also this type of margin does not require a very deep ditch because of the fact that it is above the sulcus of the gums, between the gums and the teeth. So as you can see here, the ditch is not deep at all. The margins that require a deeper ditch are usually the beveled shoulders or the feather edge margins, which are very thin, and if you don't do a ditch on them, you won't be able to mark them properly with the pencil. Deep chamfers like this, we expose the edge of the margin very easily, so we can take a pencil and mark the edge without any problems. We're not quite there yet, you see, there's still a little bit of tissue here that we need to take away. Now if we look at this die here, we can see that the ditch here is more convex than concave. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the ditch a little bit here. And I'm not going to use this little burr because it's going to just give me lines along the margin. So let's change this to like a medium size or large round burr, which will allow us to give it a little bit of a ditch but not overdo it. And as you notice, I am only going one way when I'm cutting. I go very close to the margin, but I don't go exactly to the margin. And since it's a large burr, it doesn't give me lines. So once I think I did enough with the ditch, then we'll go back to the instrument and we're gonna go again right to the margin. And very carefully just take away the stone so that the margin is completely exposed. Okay, so this is what I'm looking for. The ditch is not too deep, but the margin is exposed. Now let's mark the margin. Now to mark the margin, I like to use a 0.7 engineering pencil because it gives us a nice thin point and you never have to sharpen it. You just press the button to release it. Now we're going to use the side of the pencil to mark the margin. This will give us a nice thin line. All around. And blow off the excess pencil dust. If we feel we can straighten the line a little bit more, then we can take the instrument again and kind of remove the areas where the line might look like it's too thick because it's not 100% clear. So we can just straighten it out. here there's a little bit too much tissue left, so I'm going to take it away. Sometimes when the margin is not 100% straight, might be a little bit of tissue still left on there, which prevents the pencil from marking the margin properly. So there we go. There's a little bit left there too. Maybe we didn't ditch it too much over here, so I'll just use the instrument to take away the excess stone. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put dye sealer on it. So, place the dye sealer all over the dye. Let it soak in well. If the dye is nice and dry, it will soak in the dye sealer and it won't give us any extra space in the wax. So this way, when we wax to the margin, there won't be any space once we make the crown. If you put dye sealer all over that's too thick, it's going to end up acting like a dye spacer, which will create a space that the dentist will see in the mouth, and then our crown might be sent back for remake. Alright, the next step will be putting on dye spacer. When we put the dye spacer on, we put it on 1 millimeter from the margin. And as you can see, I'm putting this on really fast. If you go too slow and you play with it too much, the dye spacer will start drying and it will not go on smooth. So depending on the thickness of the dye spacer, you can put 2 or 3 coats on. Remember to stay away from the margins and go about 1 millimeter up from the marginal areas. Once this is dry, we can put on another coat. if you have other colored die spacers, you can alternate colors so that you can see exactly where you put on the die spacer. It is also important that when we put on the die spacer on the inside of the ledge, we kind of go like this and not brush it on too hard, because we want to build up a little bit of thickness on the inside of the ledge of the preparation, for the reason that it can thin out at the corners because the die spacer may run down the sides of the die. So the completed die should look like this. Nice and clean, with the deep chamfers like this, these deep chamfer margins like this. We want to not over ditch the die. So now you can continue and do it exactly the same way on all of the dies. Now if you have a problem with removing the die from the model itself, then you can trim the sides of the die so that each die can come out by themselves. Okay, let's try it.